Let's talk numbers. How much do I really make now as a resident physician, and how does it compare to my previous job as a registered nurse? Hey everyone, if you're new here, I am Lily Wynn. I was a former registered nurse for 5 years prior to going to medical school. I am now a first-year resident who will be specializing in diagnostic radiology. I know salary is a really big question people need to consider when going from RN to MD. So this video is going to break down all of my annual salary starting from my first job as a registered nurse throughout my 5 years working and how it compares to my resident salary now. We'll also briefly discuss honestly like what the future might look like for me when I become an attending radiologist. And don't forget the fact that I am like $100,000 in student debt. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so let's see how much I made during my first year as a registered nurse. I got my first job as a registered nurse after doing a student nurse externship at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. So they have this cool program called the Summer 3 program where they recruit nursing students from around the country to do a 3-month paid externship, and they teach you basically how to be a nurse. It's really great way for them to recruit nurses. So you learn the Mayo way during nursing school, and then they offer you a job at the end. So I did that. I was offered a job on a cardiac open heart surgery floor where people have had like cabbages, heart transplants, LVADs, and I would recover them right out of the ICU. So it was a post-surgical unit. It was bedside nursing. It was really difficult, but the nice thing was Mayo Clinic has really good nursing ratios. So I only had about 4 patients that I would take care of during a shift. That was the most bedside nursing that I did. I did that job for about 1.5 years, and my salary for my first year as a registered nurse was $54,807. I do want to point out that I was a registered nurse prior to COVID, and I never did any travel nursing, and I never picked up overtime or very rarely picked up overtime. So my salary is a lot less than the potential of a registered nurse. I know a registered nurse who has a bachelor's degree who did clinic work, and she made like $100,000 per year. I never came close to that. About 1.5 years into my nursing career, I decided to pivot. I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I actually ended up leaving my nursing job and going abroad to do the Peace Corps. That was a total failure in a different story, but I ended up dropping out of the Peace Corps, coming back to Arizona, and picking up a community health nursing job that did not pay very well. And throughout that year, I was kind of jumping from job to job until I was able to find a nursing job that I was happy with. I ended up doing some shifts in the emergency department, and nothing really felt right to me until I found a research nursing job at my local university. The research job was in cardiology, so I worked really closely with cardiologists who were doing studies on devices, and I helped enroll patients. I did informed consent. I did all of their follow-up lab work and help monitor side effects of new medications that we were testing. That was one of my lowest earning years. I made $37,703. So you have to understand that part of that year was working as a bedside nurse. A good chunk of it was not working at all because I left to go to the Peace Corps. Then I picked up a job as a community health nurse, and then I did a couple of weeks in the emergency room, but felt like that was really not the right job for me, and then ended up in a research position. During year 3 as a registered nurse, I worked as a cardiac nurse researcher. This is an academic job. You're not doing bedside nursing. It's Monday through Friday, and most of the work that I was doing was kind of like a desk job. Most of my days were learning what these research projects were and how patients were included or excluded from them. I would then look through patients' charts to see what patients I could try to enroll. If I found patients that met all of the inclusion criteria, I would make a list of them and then either call them or go find them while they're in the hospital. I would then introduce the research projects to them and tell them what the pros and cons were about it, risk and benefits, and go through the entire informed consent process with them. I would enroll the patients and then follow up on them throughout the weeks that they were enrolled in these research projects. That job was pretty low stress, and I actually enjoyed it because I had a really great team. It was not very well paid, and it was Monday through Friday, so sometimes it restricted when I can take my pre-med prerequisites. During that year, I made $49,065. That was my year as a cardiac research nurse. The great thing about being a cardiac research nurse was I was really connected to the staff in the cath lab. I got to know the registered nurses there who were prepping patients for the cath lab procedures and recovering them. And during my time as a research nurse, I was spending a lot of time enrolling patients in the cath lab for device procedures, and a position opened. I ended up interviewing for the position during one of my work shifts during my lunch hour, and they gave me the job. This ended up being the job that I stayed in for 3 years doing my pre-med prerequisites. I really loved the schedule of my cath lab job because it was 3/12s, Monday through Friday only. So we never worked weekends, we never worked nights, and we were never on call. We also never worked holidays because all of the procedures that were often happening in the cath lab were elective, and there were specific cath lab nurses that would answer STEMI calls, but we did not have to. I was able to coordinate with the nursing staff to be able to take my pre-med exams and also take courses. This was the most flexible time that I had while I was working my registered nurse job. In my third year as a registered nurse and my first year in this position, I made $56,863. In the following year, I worked a little bit less because I was taking so many pre-med courses, and I ended up taking a dedicated period to study for my MCAT. During that time, I actually went from full-time to PRN. As a PRN nurse, I was only required to work 1 shift a month, and I ended up picking up 1 shift per week just to make sure that I was able to pay my bills. But in that year, I made $50,976. My 5th year as a registered nurse was actually in 2020 when COVID shut everything down. Because I was in the cath lab holding area, this area does elective procedures, so we were shut down. I went on spring break with my husband, and we both did not come back to jobs. My husband is a teacher, and school shut down, and the cath lab shut down. Little did I know, after leaving for my spring break, I would never go back to my nursing job again. You'll have to fast forward 4 years, because during all my 4 years of med school, I did not work, I did not make money, I just went into debt. Fortunately for me, I did receive a tuition scholarship, so the loans that I took out were only for living expenses. I ended up with a little over $100,000 in debt, and I honestly plan to pay a lot of it off during residency and within my first year as an attending. Now that I'm finally doing taxes as a resident, I want to talk about how much I'm making in my PGY 1 year. My current intern year really ranges in hours that I work. It depends on the rotation that I'm on. 6 months out of the year, there are difficult rotations where I work 6 days out of the week. Often those days are long, between 10 and 12 hours. But there are also 6 months out of the year where I am working much less demanding rotations. Like right now, I'm probably working only like 15 hours per week on my diagnostic radiology rotation. They only really expect me to come in half days, 5 days a week. The hours vary greatly in my intern year. My salary for my first year is $67. My salary for my first year is $67,861, plus I get free meals while I'm at work. As you can see, that is already $10,000 more than any of the years that I worked as a registered nurse. I will say my salary is probably very much different than any other registered nurse who is working now. 1, because inflation has been crazy. 2, because I was a nurse prior to COVID. I didn't get any of the COVID incentives. I never worked as a travel nurse. I rarely ever picked up overtime, and I didn't work nights or weekends. So I didn't get those weekend and nights incentives either. People are often under the impression that if you were to leave your nursing job, and maybe it is the case now, but it wasn't the case for me, that you would just make so much less, you'd be living on pennies as a resident, but it's just not true. As a PGY2, or my next year, I'm expected to make $68,439. As a PGY3, $70,628, and so on. It increases about $2,000 to $3,000 per year. Of course, all of this is probably way less than I could be making as a very experienced RN or even as an NP, but this is where the math changes. Moonlighting. The really cool part of being a radiology resident is that there are tons of moonlighting opportunities, meaning you get paid to work a little bit extra, but doing specific things that are not that demanding. First of all, radiology residency in and of itself is just not as hourly demanding as other residencies like general surgery or internal medicine. You typically have a very predictable schedule where you work Monday through Friday, you don't work evenings, you don't work weekends. And this is when residents take advantage of picking up extra shifts. The key here is what these shifts involve. With radiology residency, there's something called contrast coverage, meaning you sit in the reading room and respond to possible allergic reactions to contrast dye that is ejected prior to imaging. This actually happens pretty rarely, but when it does, a physician needs to be available to be able to order the medication to help treat patients for this. At my future institution, contrast coverage is $125 per hour. So just imagine you can sit in the reading room, read a book, edit your YouTube content, and be making $125 per hour. If you do that for 5 extra hours per week, the entire month you're making an additional $2,500. The real payout is when residency ends and you become an attending. Once I finish training, things really shift. The average diagnostic radiology salary is like $400,000 to $800,000 per year. As a private practice diagnostic radiologist, you can project it to make even more than that. That's honestly why this journey is all about the long game and delayed gratification. I grew up poor. My mother raised my sister and I working 3 different jobs. I think she only made like $15,000 per year. So to go from that to possibly making $500,000 as a future radiologist is mind-blowing to me. Honestly, leaving bedside nursing and going to medical school doesn't feel financially smart in the short term, but it's all about the long game here. You're setting yourself up for a career with massive earning potential in the future, but most importantly, a job that you can truly love. If you're thinking about going from the RN to MD route, make sure that you look at the entire picture. What kind of career do you want? What kind of lifestyle do you want? And what specialty really excites you? I did write a step-by-step guide for RNs and other non-traditional students who have clinical background who want to go to medical school. Hundreds of people have already purchased my guide and have found it helpful. You can find the link in the description box below. If you like my videos, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'd love to hear from you and answer any questions you might have. Speaking of salary and income, I do have a bit of a side income doing social media. So if you're interested in knowing a little more about how I do that as a med influencer, let me know in the comments and I can put out a future video showing you how. Thank you for watching.